I never thought I'd catch my wife cheating on me with our neighbor. My name is Robert, but everyone calls me Bob. I'm working at an engineering company, and for 7 years I was married to Deb. We also have a wonderful daughter, Izzy, who is 6. Deb and I met at a friend's party. She had just broken up with her long-term boyfriend, who cheated on her because she wanted to wait until marriage for intimacy. Knowing her story, I took things slow when we started dating. I wasn't a virgin, but I was far from experienced. Deb and I connected on a deep level because we both valued a conservative approach to relationships. When we finally got married, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Our wedding was beautiful, and our life together seemed perfect. Deb was sweet, caring, and a devoted mother. Our intimacy started slow, but grew stronger over time. At first, we only explored each other over our clothes. Deb wasn't ready for anything more, but eventually, she felt comfortable enough to give and receive oral intimacy. It was clear she enjoyed it, and it brought us closer together. A few months after we started dating, Deb and I decided to get married. By then, we had become quite close, both emotionally and physically. Deb lost her virginity to me 2 weeks after we got engaged. It was a tender moment, even though it was a bit painful for her at first. After our wedding, our intimate life became very active, and Deb soon started taking the pill so we could stop using protection. When Izzy was born, I felt our family was complete. Deb seemed happy balancing motherhood and her part-time teaching job. I loved coming home to see her and Izzy playing together. We had a routine and life was good. Deb was friendly with other men, but never the flirting type, so I never suspected anything. It all started to fall apart at a New Year's party in our neighborhood. The kids stayed in one house with teenage nannies, while the adults partied in another. Deb and I were there with our good friends, Tom and his wife, Jennifer. At midnight, there was a lot of playful kissing between friends. I kissed Jennifer with a peck, while Deb kissed Tom with an intensity one hadn't seen before. Their tongues danced together, but at the time I thought it was just the alcohol and the festive atmosphere. When we got home, Deb was more passionate than ever. I thought it was the excitement from the party. What I didn't know was that Deb had kissed Tom in one of the children's rooms and given him oral affection. This was the start of their affair. From then on, Deb's behavior began to change subtly. She became more reserved about her time with Tom, insisting that our kids play together despite Izzy not wanting to. Her interest in me also waned. I missed several signs. I thought her focus on working out and dieting was for me, but I didn't notice the increased text messages at odd hours. When I asked, she said they were from a friend. For almost 3 months, I was oblivious to what was happening right under my nose. It wasn't until a drunken night after an event at my firm that I got my first clear sign. Deb, who had always found a certain position dirty, suddenly wanted to try it. In the midst of our intimacy, she screamed out, "God, Tom." I froze. She was too drunk to realize I had stopped. I spent the night in shock, unable to sleep, trying to rationalize what I had heard. The next morning, I casually asked her about trying that position. The look on her face said it all. She went pale and blamed the alcohol, but her stuttering and panic confirmed my worst fears. That was the moment I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I couldn't get the image of Deb calling out Tom's name out of my head. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a drunken slip-up, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I started paying more attention to Deb's behavior, looking for any signs that she might be hiding something. It didn't take long for my suspicions to grow stronger. First, I noticed her phone. Deb had always been open with her phone, leaving it around the house, and we knew each other's passwords. Suddenly, her phone was always with her, and when I tried to use it, I found it was password protected with a new code. When I asked her about it, she shrugged it off, saying she had to change it for security reasons, but her eyes couldn't meet mine when she said it. Then there were the messages. Deb's phone would light up with notifications at odd hours, and she'd quickly check them and put the phone away. When I asked who it was, she'd say it was just a friend or something related to work. The explanation seemed plausible at first, but the frequency and timing of the messages were off. I decided to start keeping track of her movements. I didn't want to confront her without solid evidence, so I took a more discreet approach. I noticed that she began spending more time away from home, claiming she was running errands or meeting up with friends. One day, I decided to follow her. She told me she was going to the grocery store, but instead she drove to Tom's house. I watched from a distance as she entered without knocking, like she had done it many times before. My heart sank, but I needed more proof. I started researching ways to gather evidence. One suggestion was to check the frequency of laundry, particularly the sheets. Deb had always been diligent about laundry, but I noticed the guest room sheets were being washed more frequently. It didn't make sense since we rarely had guests. I also started to think back to the New Year's party. Deb and Tom's kiss was more than just a friendly peck. The intensity of their kiss and the way they looked at each other that night replayed in my mind. I realized that was the night it all began. One evening while Deb was in the shower, I tried to access her phone again. I failed to unlock it, but I noticed she had left her email open on her laptop. I quickly went through her emails and found nothing suspicious. But then I checked the trash folder. There I found several deleted emails from Tom. They were careful not to be too explicit, but the tone was unmistakable. They mentioned meeting up, missing each other, and shared inside jokes that I knew were not meant for friends. Determined to catch them in the act, I set up surveillance cameras in the house. I bought a few small, discreet cameras and installed them in the kitchen, living room, and guest room. I also set up an app on Deb's phone that mirrored her messages to mine. It was a painful invasion of privacy, but I felt I had no choice. I needed to know the truth. The next few days were torturous. Every time her phone buzzed, my heart would race. I watched the footage from the cameras obsessively. Finally, I caught them. Deb and Tom were in our guest room, kissing passionately. I watched as they undressed each other, their bodies colliding in a way that made me sick to my stomach. I had the proof I needed, but I didn't know what to do next. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. My perfect life had been shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I knew I had to confront Deb, but I needed a plan. I couldn't just accuse her without showing her what I knew. I had to be strategic for my sake and for Izzy's. The following morning I acted as if everything was normal. Inside I was boiling with rage, but I kept my cool. I casually asked Deb about her plans for the day and pretended to be interested in her activities. She seemed a bit nervous, but she didn't suspect anything. I decided that I would gather a bit more evidence before making my move. I wanted to be absolutely sure before confronting her. It was only a matter of time before the house of cards came tumbling down, and I would be there to watch it all fall apart. The moment I knew I had to get undeniable proof of Deb's affair, I shifted into high gear. I spent a few hours researching the best surveillance equipment and apps for monitoring her messages. I needed to catch them in the act. No doubts or room for explanations. I went to an electronics store and bought a few small, high-definition cameras with audio capabilities. They were easy to hide and had motion detection features, which would make it simple to capture their activities without recording hours of empty footage. I set up the cameras in strategic spots around the house: our bedroom, the guest room, the kitchen, and the living room. These were places where Deb and Tom would likely meet. I also installed an app on Deb's phone that mirrored her messages to mine. It took a few attempts, but eventually I got it to work. Now, every time Deb received a text or sent one, I would see it too. It felt invasive and wrong on many levels, but I was desperate. I needed to know the truth. The first night after setting everything up, I could hardly sleep. Every buzz from my phone made my heart race. Around midnight, a message from Tom came through. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Usual spot?" Deb replied almost immediately. "Yes. Same time. Miss you." My hands were shaking as I read their messages. The reality of the situation was hitting me hard. The next day I watched the live feed from the cameras on my phone. Deb dropped Izzy off at school and came back home. Her behavior seemed normal, but around noon Tom's car pulled up. My blood boiled as I watched him walk up to our front door and enter the house. They went straight to the guest room, just as I suspected. Through the camera, I saw them embrace, kiss, and then start to undress each other. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they were being recorded. I captured everything: their conversations, their intimacy, and the moments afterward when they lay in each other's arms. For the next few days, I continued to collect evidence. Each time they met, I recorded it. Each time they exchanged messages, I saved them. My anger grew with every interaction I witnessed. I couldn't believe how brazen they were, how little they thought of me and Izzy. But I knew I needed to stay calm and think clearly. Once I felt I had enough evidence, I contacted a lawyer. I explained the situation and showed him the videos and messages. He was shocked, but assured me we had a strong case. He suggested that I also reach out to Jennifer, Tom's wife, to see if she wanted to collaborate. It made sense. She was a victim too, and together we could confront our spouses and handle the situation more effectively. I called Jennifer and arranged to meet her at a coffee shop. When I arrived, she looked anxious. We exchanged pleasantries, and then I told her about Deb and Tom. She wasn't as surprised as I expected. It turned out she had her suspicions too. I showed her the evidence I had collected, and she was furious. "That bastard," she muttered. I knew he was up to something, but I didn't want to believe it. Jennifer agreed to work with me. She contacted her lawyer, and we began to plan our strategy. We would confront Deb and Tom simultaneously, present them with the evidence, and serve them divorce papers. We needed to make sure they couldn't deny anything and that we had the upper hand legally. As the day of the confrontation approached, I became increasingly anxious. I kept replaying how it would go down in my mind, trying to anticipate every possible reaction from Deb. I needed to stay calm and collected no matter what. For Izzy's sake, I had to keep my composure and handle this as smoothly as possible. The night before I barely slept, I kept checking the cameras and reading their messages, reminding myself why I was doing this. When morning came, I felt a strange sense of calm. The plan was in place, and it was time to act. I kissed Izzy goodbye, took a deep breath, and headed out, ready to face the storm that was about to break. The day of the confrontation was finally here. Jennifer and I had coordinated our plans perfectly. We decided to meet at her lawyer's office first, where I handed over the damning evidence. We needed to make sure everything was in order before we made our move. I remember my hands were sweaty and my heart pounded like a drum. Jennifer looked equally tense but determined. Around noon, we drove separately to our homes. The plan was simple but effective. I would confront Deb at our house while Jennifer would confront Tom at theirs. We would call each other right after, ensuring we were both safe and that neither Deb nor Tom could deny anything. I got home first. Deb was in the living room reading a book. She looked up and smiled, but I could see a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice too cheerful. I forced a smile and told her I needed to talk to her in the living room. I could see her anxiety rise as she followed me. Once we were both seated, I took a deep breath and said, "Deb, I know about you and Tom." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, pulling out my phone and showing her the first video. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Bob, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. "Don't lie to me, Deb. I have more videos, more messages. I know everything." I showed her more footage, each one more damning than the last. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over again. I handed her the divorce papers. "You need to sign these," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "You'll get % of our assets, and you'll have supervised visitation rights with Izzy. No child support. If you refuse, I'll release these videos to everyone we know. Do you understand?" Deb looked at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please, Bob, don't do this. I can't lose Izzy. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. But I love you. I love our family." Her words stung, but I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. "I trusted you, Deb. You betrayed me and our family. I'm done." I handed her a pen and watched as she reluctantly signed the papers. She knew she had no choice. Just as she finished signing, my phone rang. It was Jennifer. I answered, and she told me everything had gone according to plan on her end. Tom had tried to deny it at first, but when she showed him the evidence, he became angry and tried to attack her. Luckily, her lawyer was there, and they called the police. Tom was arrested, and Jennifer was safe. I hung up and looked at Deb. "Tom's been arrested. Jennifer had him taken away. This is over." She nodded. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a pang of pity for her, but quickly pushed it aside. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I packed a small bag for her with some clothes and personal items. "You need to leave now," I said, not meeting her eyes. She nodded and slowly walked upstairs to our bedroom. I followed her, making sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. When she was done, I escorted her to the front door. She turned to me one last time, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Bob. I really am." I nodded, unable to say anything. She stepped out, and I closed the door behind her. As soon as she left, I collapsed on the couch, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The house felt eerily quiet without her. I glanced at the clock and realized Izzy would be home from school soon. I needed to pull myself together for her sake. She didn't deserve any of this. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. She was checking in to make sure I was okay. I appreciated it, but felt numb. There was so much to process, so much to figure out. But for now, I had to focus on Izzy. She was my priority. I stood up, took a deep breath, and started to prepare dinner. Life had to go on, no matter how shattered I felt inside. I had to be strong for my daughter. She needed me now more than ever. As soon as Deb left the house, reality hit hard. The emotional roller coaster of confronting her had taken its toll, but I couldn't afford to collapse. I had to be there for Izzy. I spent the next hour trying to focus on something mundane, making dinner. Cooking usually helped calm my nerves, but that evening, everything felt off. The house was too quiet, and my mind kept replaying the confrontation. When Izzy came home from school, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Where's Mom?" she asked, looking around the house. I took a deep breath, knelt down to her level, and gently told her that Mommy needed to go away for a while. I tried to keep it simple, saying that sometimes adults have problems and need time apart. Izzy's eyes welled up with tears, and she hugged me tightly. It broke my heart, but I knew this was just the beginning of many tough conversations. Over the next few days, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Izzy. We kept our usual routines, homework, bedtime stories, weekend outings. But everything felt different. There was a gaping hole where Deb used to be. I found myself constantly explaining her absence to friends and family who were both shocked and supportive. I told them that Deb and I were separating and that she wouldn't be around for a while. Most people didn't press for details, but the pity in their eyes was unmistakable. One evening, a few days after Deb left, I received a call from her parents. They were furious, accusing me of throwing their daughter out and demanding an explanation. I calmly told them the truth. I explained Deb's affair with Tom, the evidence I had, and the confrontation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eventually, her father spoke, his tone softer, almost defeated. He said they would come over to talk and see Izzy. When they arrived, I showed them the videos and messages. Deb's mother broke down in tears, and her father just shook his head, clearly devastated. They understood why I had taken the steps I did, but it didn't make the situation any easier. We agreed that they could see Izzy regularly, and I promised to keep them updated on everything. It was a small comfort in the midst of chaos. Meanwhile, Jennifer and I kept in close contact. She was dealing with her own mess with Tom, who was still in jail. We exchanged updates and supported each other through the ordeal. It was strange how our mutual betrayal had brought us closer, but it was also a relief to have someone who truly understood what I was going through. A week after the confrontation, I received a call from my lawyer. He informed me that Deb had contracted an incurable STD from Tom. This news hit like a ton of bricks. It was another layer of betrayal and another complication to navigate. I immediately filed for an emergency court order to modify the custody arrangement. I couldn't risk Izzy's health, and the court agreed. They restricted Deb's visitation rights to supervised visits only, and any physical contact with Izzy was prohibited until further notice. Telling Izzy that she couldn't hug or touch her mom was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. She didn't understand why and kept asking questions I couldn't fully answer. I tried to explain it in terms she could grasp, saying that Mommy was sick and needed to get better before they could be close again. It was heartbreaking to see her struggle with this new reality. Despite everything, I had to keep moving forward. Work was a welcome distraction, and my colleagues were incredibly supportive. They picked up the slack when I needed to take time off for court hearings or to be with Izzy. My boss even arranged for flexible hours so I could better manage my new responsibilities as a single parent. Deb tried to contact me several times, but I kept our conversations brief and to the point. She was devastated, pleading for another chance, but I couldn't go back. The trust was shattered and the damage was too deep. My focus had to be on Izzy and rebuilding our lives. Over time, we settled into a new routine. Izzy adjusted to the changes better than I expected, showing resilience that amazed me. We found moments of joy and laughter amidst the pain, and slowly the wounds began to heal. It wasn't easy and some days were harder than others, but we were moving forward step by step. Through it all, I learned the importance of strength and resilience. I realized that while the betrayal had broken my heart, it hadn't broken my spirit. For Izzy's sake and my own, I had to keep fighting, keep pushing forward, and keep believing that better days were ahead. As the months passed, life slowly began to take on a new normal. Izzy and I settled into our routine, finding comfort in the small things. Making breakfast together, reading bedtime stories, and our weekend trips to the park. Each day, I focused on being the best father I could be, giving Izzy the stability and love she needed to heal from the upheaval of her mother's departure. Deb's supervised visits were difficult at first. Izzy was confused and hurt, often asking why she couldn't hug her mom. The visits took place at a family center, always with a social worker present. Deb looked different each time, her once vibrant energy replaced by a worn-out, guilt-ridden demeanor. I tried to keep my distance during these visits, letting Izzy and Deb have their time together. But it was hard not to watch from afar, feeling a mix of anger and pity. One day after a particularly emotional visit, Izzy asked me, "Daddy, when will Mommy come home?" I had to take a deep breath before answering, "Mommy isn't coming home, sweetie. She loves you very much. But sometimes adults make mistakes, and those mistakes mean we have to live apart." She looked at me with those big questioning eyes, and I hugged her tightly, wishing I could take away all her pain. Deb's illness added another layer of complexity to everything. The STD she contracted from Tom was incurable, and her health was a constant concern. There were times when she couldn't make it to the visits because she was too sick. Each missed visit was another disappointment for Izzy, and I had to find ways to comfort her and explain why her mom couldn't be there. Work provided a necessary distraction. My colleagues and boss were incredibly supportive, allowing me to adjust my schedule as needed. I poured myself into my projects, finding solace in the structure and demands of my job. It helped me feel like I had some control in a life that had felt so chaotic for so long. Jennifer and I kept in touch too. We had formed a bond through our shared experience, and she became a trusted friend. Her divorce from Tom was finalized quickly, and she moved away with their daughter, Mary, to start fresh. We would exchange texts and occasional phone calls, checking in on each other and offering support. It was strange how such a painful situation had brought us together, but I was grateful for her friendship. Despite the challenges, there were moments of happiness. Izzy and I made new memories. Like our first Christmas alone, we decorated the tree together, baked cookies, and even started a new tradition of watching holiday movies in our pajamas. It wasn't the same as before, but it was ours, and that made it special. Deb's situation grew more dire over time. Her health deteriorated, and she struggled with depression. I received a call one night from her mother, Mrs. Anderson, her voice trembling as she told me that Deb had taken her own life. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I never wanted it to end this way. I felt a deep sorrow for Deb, remembering the woman I had fallen in love with and the mother of my child. Telling Izzy about her mom's death was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat her down, holding her hands, and gently explained that Mommy had gone to heaven. Her little face crumpled, and she cried in my arms for what felt like hours. I held her, whispering that it wasn't her fault, that Mommy loved her very much, and that we would get through this together. The funeral was a somber affair. I stood there holding Izzy's hand as we said our final goodbyes. Deb's parents were there, their faces etched with grief. Despite everything that had happened, we shared a moment of mutual understanding and sorrow. Deb had made terrible mistakes, but she was still a part of our lives, and her loss was deeply felt. In the months that followed, Izzy and I continued to navigate our new reality. We saw a therapist regularly, which helped both of us process our emotions. I focused on building a stable, loving environment for Izzy, ensuring she knew she was safe and cherished. Life had dealt us a tough hand, but we were moving forward. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and healing. I found strength in my love for Izzy and the support of friends and family. Together we faced the future, knowing that while the past had shaped us, it didn't define us. We were stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next.